Death in Venice, German, Der Tod in Venedig, is a novella written by German author Thomas Mann. Published in 1912, it is the story of how a famous author's infatuation and subsequent obsession with a young man he has met during his travel to Venice ultimately leads to his destruction. It has inspired a 1971 film of the same name starring Dirk Bogarde made by Luchino Visconti, as well as a 1973 opera. Gustav von Eschenbach, a well-known and respected German author, is suddenly seized with a mad wanderlust one day when he suddenly chances upon a strange-looking foreigner while taking his daily walk. All his life he has been an ascetic, not caring about anything but his literary labors, but recently he feels a mental sluggishness of the sort men who work themselves to exhaustion at times feel, so he decides to seize upon his feelings and embark on a trip. He abandons the thought of travel to more exotic lands of marshes and tigers in favor of the more accessible, yet equally charming, Venice. While shipbound en route to Venice, he chances to see a man in the company of a group of youth. To his horror, the man is old, but tries to hide the traces of age by wearing a wig, false teeth, and wearing copious amounts of makeup. Aschenbach is shaken by the sight. He feels like the old man has stolen the right to the exalted company of youth. The whole experience fills him with a sense of wrong and dread. Men are not meant to steal the valor of youth by painting their faces. He turns away in disgust as the impostor later attempts to strike a drunken conversation with him. After an eventful trip on a gondola, where he is given a ride by a strange-looking, unlicensed gondolier, he arrives at his hotel in Lido. At dinner, among the multitude of traveling masses, he is mesmerized by the sight of an aristocratic Polish family. Neither the bejeweled but portly mother nor the nun-like daughters are much to speak of, but the son, Tadzio, is a sight for sore eyes. He is blessed with extreme personal beauty. He has the looks and the bearing of a young Greek god. His blond curls so delicately frame his fine features, and he has the gestures of a tragic figure. Aschenbach is greatly affected by the boy's charm. He begins spying on him discreetly. The lad stimulates his artistic senses to the utmost. He is soon infatuated with the young god. But the hot, humid weather of the beach town is not doing Aschenbach's fragile health any favors. He makes up his mind to leave Venice for a drier, less warm climate. But every time he sees young Tadzio again, a pang of regret shoots through his heart. By some serendipitous happenstance, his trunk is misplaced at the railroad. He theaters disdain and dissatisfaction at everyone, but he is rarely overjoyed. Fates have decided he can stay with the object of his desire again. He goes back to his hotel, this time with no intention to leave. Aschenbach's infatuation slowly turns into obsession. He begins stalking the boy. He even begins attending mass, so he won't be separated from the boy even on Sundays. He begins to fancy the boy has taken a liking to him too. He begins to interpret every little action of the boy, every look and every innocent smile as a sign he returns his feelings. He fancies the boy has smiled at him. This causes him to finally realize the romantic nature of his feelings for the boy. During his 4th week in Lido, Aschenbach takes a trip into the city of Venice, where he sees a few discreetly worded notices from the authorities warning of an unspecified contagion and advising people to avoid eating shellfish. He smells a pungently sweet odor everywhere, later realizing it is that of disinfectant. However, the authorities steadfastly deny that there is an epidemic of any sort going on, and tourists continue to wander obliviously around the city. Using money exchange as an excuse, he strikes up a conversation with a British travel agent who tells him that despite the official denial, there is an epidemic of cholera going on. He has a dream filled with Dionysian imagery that reveal to him the sexual nature of his feelings for the boy. This is a moment of clarity, and afterwards he no longer shows self-restraint in pursuing the boy. Aschenbach begins to worry about his aging face and body. In an attempt to look more attractive, he visits the hotel's barbershop almost every day. The barber persuades him to have his hair dyed and his face painted to look more youthful. He does not even realize that he has now become the very man with the painted face he so dearly despised at the beginning of the story. One day, after a particularly exhausting day of chasing the boy through the streets, he is suddenly seized with unquenchable thirst and carelessly stops at a fruit vendor to quench his thirst, despite his promise to himself not to have any of the local produce for the fear of cholera. He opts to have some overripe strawberries. A few days later, Aschenbach goes to the lobby of the hotel feeling ill and weak and discovers that the Polish family is planning to leave after lunch. He goes to the beach, to his usual spot, to see an unsupervised Tadzio one last time. He is accompanied by Jasio, an older boy who usually plays with him. A fight starts between the two, and Tadzio is quickly defeated. An angry Tadzio leaves his companion and wades over to Aschenbach's part of the beach, where he stands for a moment looking out to sea, then turns halfway around to look at his admirer. To Aschenbach, it is as if the boy is beckoning to him. He tries to rise and follow, only to collapse sideways into his chair. His body is discovered a few minutes later. Thomas Mann, often called the greatest German novelist of the 20th century, was born 1875 in the North German city of Lübeck. He came from a well-to-do merchant family and was able, even as a young man, to devote himself to writing as a career. His first novel, The Buddenbrooks, 1901, won both popular and critical acclaim, deeply indebted to the German cultural tradition and specifically influenced by Schopenhauer, Wagner and Nietzsche. Mann combines intellectual themes with vivid realism and comic flair. Much of his work, including the early novellas Tonio Krüger and Death in Venice, explore the psychology of the creative temperament and the often tragic position of the intellectual or artist in bourgeoisie society. Politically, he became an increasingly outspoken opponent of European fascism, a concern reflected in his second major novel, The Magic Mountain, and in his later work. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1929 and the Goethe Prize in 1949. His exile from Hitler's Germany began in 1933, and he was deprived of German citizenship in 1936. In 1938, he settled in the United States. Mann died in Kirchberg, near Zurich, on August 12, 1955. Death in Venice is by no means just a love story. It is an exploration of the charming humiliation that comes with adoring someone. It is an examination of how we justify our irrational obsessions. It is about how we rationalize ourselves before our own dignity. The novella is rife with themes from antiquity. Much of the text is devoted to a discourse between Plato and Phaedrus, discussing the nature of love. There are also allusions to the Nietzschean contrast between Apollo and Dionysius. But the central theme is that of dignity. Thomas Mann explicitly mentions that the ultimate aim of Aschenbach's labors was neither fame nor money, but to amass himself dignity. He is superbly satisfied by the dignity his literary ventures have brought him. The fact that people look up to him as the role model for a new intellectual type, the aristocratic font before his surname. The fact that recently his prose appears in school textbooks as an example to adhere to. The respectful recognition from the youth. To him, dignity is everything. And it is this dignity that is ultimately sacrificed in his quest for love, ultimately culminating in him dyeing his hair and wearing makeup to look younger. Then there is the contrast between unimaginable beauty, that of the Polish boy, and hideousness. Every time some change is about to come upon Aschenbach, it is preceded by an omen in the form of a man with unpleasant personal looks, who also is foreign in appearance. His wanderlust is triggered by the sight of a coarse-looking, red-headed foreigner, as if to foreshadow the hands of fate that will inevitably descend upon him as a result of his travel. He notably encounters the hideous old man who triggers his distaste for makeup and false youth while shipbound to Italy. His gondolier, the man who delivers him to his fate, is also a man of rough personal appearance who seems to be a foreigner in Venice. Even the outbreak of cholera, which will ultimately take his life, is preceded by another outsider, this time a coarse minstrel, who fills him with a sense of foreboding. Much has been said about the real-life influences that inspired this story. Modris Eckstein notes the similarities between Aschenbach and the Russian choreographer Sergei Diaghilev, writing that although the two never met, Diaghilev knew Mann's story well, but this is mere speculation on behalf of Eckstein. The novella's physical description of Aschenbach was based on a photograph of composer Gustav Mahler. Mahler had made a strong personal impression on Mann when they met in Munich, and Mann was shocked by the news of Mahler's death in Vienna. Mann gave Mahler's first name and facial appearance to Aschenbach, but did not talk about it in public. But by and large, the story is inspired by a real-life encounter during which many of the events of the story happened to Mann. Mann's wife, Katja, in a 1974 book, recalls that the idea for the story came during an actual vacation in Lido, Venice, which she and Thomas took in the summer of 1911. All the details of the story, beginning with the man at the cemetery, are taken from experience. In the dining room, on the very first day we saw the Polish family, which looked exactly the way my husband described them. The girls were dressed rather stiffly and severely, and the very charming, beautiful boy of about 13 was wearing a sailor suit with an open collar and very pretty lacings. He caught my husband's attention immediately. This boy was tremendously attractive, and my husband was always watching him with his companions on the beach. He did not pursue him through all of Venice, that he did not do, but the boy did fascinate him, and he thought of him often. I still remember that my uncle, Privy Councillor Friedberg, a famous professor of canon law in Leipzig, was outraged. What a story! And a married man with a family! The boy who inspired Tadzio was Baron Vladislav Moes, whose first name was usually shortened as Vladzio or just Adzio. This story was uncovered by Mann's Polish translator around 1964 and was published in the German press in 1965. Some sources report that Moes did not learn of the connection himself until he saw the 1971 film of the novel. But since this is a German language book, no review is finished without a comparison of translations thereof, of which I have read 3. The first is a translation by Kenneth Burke, which was published in periodical form in the Dial in 1924 over 3 issues. There is nothing remarkable about this translation, which serves the basic requirements of a storytelling adequately. Then there is the more recent translation by Michael Henry Hine, which I do not suggest. It is as close a translation could ever get to be a literal one, and that is not a good thing. It carries over to English all the clumsy parentheticals, all the awkward turns of phrase which are considered good style in German, but are frowned upon in English. It does not change any of the over-engineered German sentences German writing is famous for. It deems fit to keep all the haben Sie gewesen gehabt, haben geworden seins that German writers shovel, as a matter of convention, at the end of the gargantuan sentences. But my favorite translation is the one that appears in Death in Venice and Other Stories by David Luke. It is a very well-behaved translation that shows a deep understanding of both German and English. It is a brilliant, literary aware translation that is sensitive to both the author's intentions as well as the conventions of good English writing, and carries over as many of the nuances of the original as it possibly could, without making it a coarse literarism of the German text. So, on the whole, if you are going to choose a translation, I highly recommend the one by David Luke. And on that note, I bring this review to its conclusion. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, and see you soon.